Hey everyone, welcome back to another deep dive. Today we're going to get into something I think is super interesting.
All right.
It's all about how families and cultures kind of clash with, finding love.
Yeah.
We're going to look specifically at what it's like for a Latino woman trying to, figure out dating and relationships when her dad has some pretty strong opinions about who she should end up with.
Oh, wow.
And there's a twist in here I don't think you'll see coming.
Okay. I'm intrigued already.
So the article that got us thinking about all of this is from Oprah Daily, and it's called "My Latino Father Wants Me to Marry a White Man."
Okay. Well, hold on right there. That's a headline that's going to make you think.
Right.
Yeah.
Like right away, you're like, wait, what's going on here?
Yeah, you don't hear that every day.
No, not at all.
Especially coming from, a Latino immigrant himself.
That's the thing.
It kind of flips the script on what you might expect.
Totally. And that's what makes this deep dive so interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
So the author of the article, her name is Lola Mendez, and she starts off talking about her own dating life. So she grew up in Kansas
Okay.
and, not exactly the most diverse dating scene.
Right.
But then she moves to New York City.
Oh, the melting pot.
Exactly. And suddenly it's like this whole new world opens up, right?
Totally different ballgame.
And she starts connecting with other people of color, especially people who are also children of immigrants.
Okay.
And that's where things get really interesting
Oh, how so?
because she starts to feel this sense of belonging, like she found her people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get that when you have those shared experiences,
Mm-hmm.
it creates a bond that's hard to explain.
For sure. For sure. And it's like you instantly get each other in a way that other people just might not.
Exactly. You understand those little nuances and struggles.
Absolutely. But here's where things take a turn.
Okay.
Mendez's dad, who's a Latino immigrant himself from Uruguay,
Oh, wow.
he starts saying that he wants her to marry a white guy.
Okay, that's unexpected. Yeah.
Right. And at first it seems like he's joking, like just teasing her a little.
Yeah, dads do that.
But as time goes on, it becomes clear that he's actually serious about this.
He really believes it.
He really does. He thinks that marrying a white guy is the best way for his daughter to have a stable and successful life.
It's kind of a contradiction, isn't it? You
Right.
have a Latino immigrant who's basically saying that his daughter should assimilate into white society.
Yeah, it's like he's internalized the very prejudices that he might have faced himself.
Exactly, and that's a really important point to consider here. It shows how deep-rooted these societal norms and prejudices can be.
It's almost like he's saying that whiteness equals success or happiness.
Sadly, yeah, that kind of thinking is more common than we'd like to admit.
And that brings us to this concept called no atrás es la raza.
Oh, yes. That's a crucial phrase to understand in this context.
Have you ever heard of that before?
Absolutely. It's something you hear in a lot of communities of color.
What does it mean exactly?
Well, it translates to don't set back the race. And it reflects this really insidious form of internalized racism, where whiteness is seen as the ideal or the standard to strive for.
So you're saying that marrying a white person is seen as a way to elevate your social standing?
Unfortunately, yes.
Oh.
That's the underlying message.
Wow, that's messed up.
It is. And the article quotes a licensed social worker named Evelyn Almonte. She talks about how this mindset is so ingrained that people often don't even recognize it as racism.
It's just become normalized.
Sadly, yes.
She even mentions a classmate whose own mother, who was dark-skinned herself, forbid her daughter from dating anyone who wasn't white.
Wow. That's a powerful example.
It really shows you how these prejudices can get passed down within families.
Absolutely. It creates this cycle of internalized racism that's really hard to break.
And Almonte also points out that this pressure to marry white is often tied to the immigrant experience. Many immigrant parents want their children to assimilate as a way to protect them from discrimination.
It's like a survival tactic in their minds.
Yeah. Right, but the irony is that it ends up perpetuating the very system they're trying to protect their kids from.
You hit the nail on the head there.
It's so complicated.
Absolutely. It's a tangled web of cultural expectations and societal pressures.
So bringing this back to Mendez and her dad.
Yeah.
Initially, she just ignores his advice about marrying a white guy.
Oh.
And she dates men from all different backgrounds.
Makes sense. She's rebelling a little.
Yeah, but then there's this telling moment where her dad starts making negative comments about Uruguayan men.
Oh, the irony.
I know, right? And he's Uruguayan himself.
It's like he's internalized those stereotypes about his own culture.
It's wild.
It really goes to show how deeply ingrained these beliefs can be.
And then things come to a head.
What happens?
Mendez goes through a really bad breakup.
Okay.
And her dad sees this as an opportunity to really lay it all out for her.
Oh boy, here it comes.
He sits her down and explicitly says he wants her to marry a white American man.
Wow, he doesn't hold back.
Nope. And Mendez is like, completely caught off guard.
Yeah, I can imagine.
She laughs it off at first, but then it hits her that he's dead serious.
That must have been a really jarring realization.
Totally. It's like a switch flips in her mind, and she starts to question everything.
It makes you wonder how much our parents' opinions influence us, even as adults.
Yeah, for sure. And what's crazy is that Mendez starts to change her dating patterns after that conversation.
Really? How so?
So starts dating mostly white guys or guys who are white passing.
Almost like she's trying to fulfill her dad's wish.
Exactly, and it's not even a conscious decision.
It's subconscious.
Yeah, like she's been programmed in a way.
It's fascinating how those external pressures can shape our choices, even in something as personal as dating.
Right, it's like we're all trying to figure out who we are and what we want, but then these voices from our past creep in.
And it becomes this whole internal struggle.
Exactly. So much to unpack there.
Definitely lots to think about.
We'll dive back into it right after the break. So we were talking about how Lola Mendez starts dating mostly white guys or guys who could pass as white.
Yeah, it's almost like she's overcompensating, you know?
Right, and it gets even more interesting because even when she's in Latin America, she only dates Latinos who are really light-skinned.
That's so telling, isn't it? It shows how deep this colorism runs.
Yeah, it's sad but true.
And unfortunately, it's something that affects so many communities of color.
You're right, there's often this preference for lighter skin tones even within those communities.
Exactly.
And this shift in Mendez's dating patterns, it leads to some pretty uncomfortable situations.
Oh no, what happens?
Well, she starts to feel fetishized by some of the white men she's dating.
That's awful.
They're not really seeing her as a person, they're just attracted to the fact that she's Latina.
It's like they see her as exotic or something.
Yeah, and they're more focused on her looks than her personality or her accomplishments.
So it's reducing her to a stereotype.
Exactly. And Mendez gives some pretty specific examples.
Like what?
Well, she talks about how some of these guys would tell her she was mistress material, but not wife material.
Wow, that's messed up.
Yeah,
It's like they're saying she's good enough for a fling, but not for a real relationship.
it's so demeaning.
It really is.
And it reinforces this harmful idea that women of color are only good for certain types of relationships.
Exactly.
It's a reminder that even when someone says they prefer a certain race, it doesn't mean they're not also prejudiced.
You're right. Prejudice and fetishization can go hand in hand.
So it's not just about who you're attracted to, it's about how you treat people and how you see them.
Absolutely.
And I think Mendez's experiences really highlight how complex this whole issue is.
Definitely, it's not black and white.
And it's important to talk about these things, even if they're uncomfortable.
I agree. The more we talk about it, the more aware we become of these subtle forms of racism.
So the article also brings in another perspective from a therapist named Yuriana Hernandez.
Okay, what did she say?
Well, she's a bilingual licensed family therapist, and she talks about the pressure that children of immigrants face.
That's a really interesting angle. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, it's something that's often overlooked.
So what kind of pressure does she talk about?
Well, she says that children of immigrants often feel a huge responsibility to their parents.
Yeah, that makes sense.
They want to make their parents proud, and they want to validate all the sacrifices their parents made for them.
Right, like they want to live up to those expectations.
Exactly. And Mendez even says that she felt a sense of obligation towards her dad.
Because of everything he went through to give her a better life.
Right. He literally walked across South America to escape a dictatorship.
Wow, that's incredible.
I know, right? And so Mendez felt this pressure to succeed and to make her dad's journey worth it.
It must have been a lot to carry.
It was, and I think it's something that a lot of children of immigrants can relate to.
For sure, it's a unique experience.
And it makes you wonder how you balance those feelings of obligation with your own desires.
Right, how do you honor your family's history while also forging your own path?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is, and it's something that Mendez struggles with throughout the article.
So what happens next? Does she ever confront her dad about his comments?
She does.
Oh, wow, I bet that was intense.
It was, but it also leads to a really touching moment.
What do you mean?
Well, at first, her dad tries to deflect with humor,
Typical dad move.
but eventually he gets real with her.
Okay, and what does he say?
Well, she doesn't say explicitly, but she ends by saying that she hopes happiness will be the guiding force in finding her future spouse.
That's nice.
And she doesn't mention anything about race or ethnicity.
So it sounds like she's finally letting go of those expectations and focusing on what truly matters.
Yeah, it seems like she's come to terms with her own identity and her own desires.
That's a great way to put it.
And I think it's a really empowering message for anyone who's struggling with similar pressures.
Absolutely. You don't have to let other people's expectations dictate your life.
You have the right to choose your own path.
This deep dive has been a roller coaster of emotions.
It has been, hasn't it?
We've explored so many complex issues.
From internalized racism to the immigrant experience to the pressure to conform.
And I think it's given us all a lot to think about.
Definitely, it's a reminder that these issues are all around us and they affect everyone in different ways.
But most importantly, I think this deep dive has shown us the power of personal stories.
Agreed.
Lola Mendez's story is so relatable and so honest.
It is, and it's a reminder that we're not alone in these struggles.
So if you're out there listening and you're going through something similar,
Please know that you're not alone,
there are people who understand what you're going through.
and there's no shame in asking for help.
This is a conversation that needs to keep happening.
Absolutely, we need to keep talking about these issues until we can create a world where everyone feels seen and valued for who they are.
Well said. I couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks.
And that's a wrap on another deep dive.
Until next time.
Thanks for listening, everyone, and keep exploring those complex issues. Makes you think, doesn't it, like how these expectations and like almost these unspoken rules, they can get into even the most personal parts of your life.
It's true.
Like we all want to make our families happy, but where do we draw the line, you know?
Yeah, that's the tough question, is that how do we balance our own desires with those deeply held cultural values?
Especially when we're talking about something as big as love.
Exactly. It's like
Yeah.
this constant balancing act, figuring out where you fit in.
So we've been talking about Lola Mendez and her experiences as a Latina woman trying to navigate her dad's, preference for her to marry a white guy.
Right, and we've seen how complex this whole thing is, right?
Oh, yeah. We've uncovered so much like internalized racism, the pressure to assimilate the challenges that children of immigrants face.
It's a lot to process.
It really is. But I think it's a good reminder that even those choices that seem super personal, like who we fall in love with,
They're often shaped by forces bigger than us, you know?
yeah, like family culture, societal expectations.
It's like we're all caught in this web of influences.
And sometimes we don't even realize it.
Exactly. It's like we're operating on autopilot.
And that's why I think stories like Mendez's are so important.
I agree. They force us to hit pause and really examine our own beliefs.
To ask ourselves those tough questions.
Like, where do these beliefs come from, and are they really serving us?
And to recognize how those societal pressures can creep into our lives in ways we might not even realize.
Absolutely. We need to be more aware of those subtle influences.
This whole deep dive has been eye-opening for me.
Me too.
It's shown us how complex these issues are, how they play out in unexpected ways.
And how important it is to be mindful of the forces shaping our perceptions and our choices.
I think the biggest takeaway for me is the importance of self-awareness.
Yeah, like understanding how our backgrounds, our families, our cultures all play a role in how we view love and relationships.
And then asking ourselves if we're making choices that truly align with our own values.
Right, not just what other people expect of us.
It's a tough question, but it's one we all need to wrestle with.
It's about finding that balance between honoring our roots and forging our own path.
Exactly. And I think Mendez's story shows us that it's possible to do both.
It's not always easy, but it's definitely worth striving for.
So for anyone out there listening who's going through something similar,
Know that you're not alone in this,
these issues are real and they're complex.
but we don't have to let them define us.
We have the power to make our own choices and to create our own happiness.
Absolutely, and sometimes that means challenging those expectations and breaking free from those old patterns.
And that's a wrap on another Deep Dive.
Thanks for joining us.
And remember, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking knowledge because that's how we grow.